If you saw my last video, you'll know that I'm starting my mix series. So this will be the first video. And I kind of wanted to start with the foundations of how to get your song ready to be mixed, either by yourself or another engineer, and how to organize files. So for this video, more or less, I just want to go over how I set up my MIDI drums, how I edit the velocities and make my drums sound more natural, and then also how I like to organize my tracks and name everything to then be able to render and send to another mix engineer, or just to organize the files for myself. So I'm going to start the session from scratch and show you guys how I set up Kontakt within Reaper to then use GGD's drum libraries. The good thing about the GGD libraries is they work with the free version of Kontakt, the Kontakt player. Whereas if you buy other samples or libraries, they'll run in demo mode and then you won't be able to hear the samples properly. So I'm going to start in Reaper just by right-clicking the track bar and clicking Insert Virtual Instrument on New Track. So what this is going to do is add a bunch of tracks all routed into Kontakt. You click yes to that. So then all I'm going to do is, I like to use the P4 kit, the Matt Halpin P4 signature pack. So you just drop that in, let that load in, and then you'll notice there's also some tracks underneath here where it says outputs. Just check that the samples work. So that sounds good. This is probably one of my favorite kits. I still haven't had the chance to check out the P5 kit, but that'll be next on my list for sure. So just to kind of do this as quickly as possible, all I'm gonna do is in this output section is click on the plus button. And it's gonna come up with this output section where you wanna change the quantity of tracks to how many you want to add. So I usually just add like 10 to 15 tracks. I'm not necessarily gonna use all of them, but I like to do that just for speed's sake. Click OK. So then down the bottom, you've got all your tracks, and you'll notice on the left and the first track, it says 1 and 2. So that's outputting to track 1. So this KT-ST1, whatever that means. So before you do anything, you kind of want to see what tracks you have available. So in the kick, we've got kick, overheads, and rooms. And that's all for just the kick drum. Snare, you got snare top, snare bottom, overheads, room. You kind of want to see how you want to split these up. So do we want to do the snare top and snare bottom together in one track? Or do we want to separate them and process them by themselves? So at that point, once I've figured out how I want to do it, I'll go down the bottom and I'll start labeling the outputs. So I've got kick, I'll do snare T for snare top, and then snare bottom. Next, so you got 2 rack toms and you got 2 floor toms. I don't necessarily think I'm going to use all of them, but I'll route them anyway just in case. So you go R1, R2, and then F1 and F2. After that, you got cymbals. You don't have to use the spot mics, but I like to use them for a little bit of extra control. They've got panning on them, and they've also got the levels set quite low. So it's going to be up to you whether you want to change the panning to just be center and turn the mics up. And then later in Reaper, you can edit that as you want. So I like to use spot mics. I'm going to just label Hats, Ride, China, Splash, as you see it, etc. And then obviously you've got the overheads and the room. So once you've labeled all your outputs, you need to route them all into Reaper so that you can get the samples in each individual track. So we'll change this to that. It'll come up with this, so you'll need to reopen it for it to properly route them and to label things correctly. I don't know why my Kontakt in Reaper does this, but yours does it. Just click OK, save the session, and then come back and do it. So I'm just going to speed through this because it's such a tedious part of it, but if you have any extra questions, just hit me up in the comments. So there, I've routed all of the outputs into Reaper now. I'm going to save the session and come back and do it.
A few moments later.
So now that we're back in Kontakt, we can start routing each of these tracks into an output. So it's as simple as matching up the drum part to the output that you've labeled. So kick goes to kick. Kick overhead can go to overhead, and then kick room to room. And you can adjust the volume to these if you want. So if you don't want too much kick in your overheads, just turn down the track. It's that easy. So now if you hit any of the drums, you'll notice in the outputs, you can actually see where each of the sounds are going. So we know that our routing has worked properly. So then in Reaper, it's still going to be a little bit tedious, but we just have to go through and match up and label everything correctly. So first would be kick, snare, snare, top, snare, bottom. You'd have R1 and then R2. And then you'll notice these are actually stereo tracks, so you'll need to kind of group them together. So what I like to do is add another track in, just drag that together. So it's like that. So that would be the first floor tom. And then just do that for every single of those other tracks. Hopefully that makes sense. And with these tracks, since they are stereo, you're gonna have to pan them left and right, 100%. You'll notice if you don't do that, then especially with your rooms and your overheads, everything's gonna sound really mono and weird and centered. So if you don't do that, you'll be in a bit of trouble. All right, so we've gone and labeled all of our tracks. So again, just make sure all of your tracks, all of these unassigned tracks are stereo, so left and right for all of them. And for any of the other tracks that you're not using, obviously just delete them because you don't need them. And then Reaper, if you just hit this collapse the view for all tracks in this folder, it can hide it so you don't have to see all those unassigned tracks there. So they're all collapsed now. And then I usually just like to add a drum bus. And then route everything into that. And then color everything blue, just so that I know that's how I like to organize my tracks. I like to have all the drums be blue. Now that we've routed everything, we should be able to write something using Midi and see all our tracks light up. All right, so I wrote just a quick little section. So we can see now that we've routed our tracks properly, just by all of these tracks are lighting up like that. Perfect. That's probably where I'm going to leave it for this video. That is essentially how I route my drums. There's a lot more that goes into adding more samples and beefing up the drums, but I'll go into that probably more in the mixing videos that I do in the future. So next week's video, I'll show you guys how I write a drum part from scratch, how I edit the Midi, and then also how I would render out and label everything to be then mixed later on. If you guys are interested in getting the mix templates that I use in every single one of my sessions, then head over to stillworldstudios.store. And if you guys are interested in working together, whether you need a mix or master, or you just need some direction with your own music, head over to my Instagram and chuck me a DM or email stillworldstudios@gmail.com. See you guys next week for another video.